All right. All right. Does everyone see it? Okay, bingo. Happy Friday, everyone. All right,
Happy
June
Friday.
20th.
Happy Friday, Simon.
Hey, happy Friday, Stacy. Thank you so much for being on Zoom. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And to the rest of you on Zoom, thanks so much for being on the call. So, understanding the buyer investigations, okay? So, here's kind of the bottom line to it, right? There's three documentations that I want you to focus on moving forward, okay? Meaning when you represent a buyer and going through the due diligence perspective, right? Knowing the three, which is the BIA, the BIE, and the BIW, right? What what are these forms? Why do we use these forms, and how do you navigate it to protect yourself from any potential situation where the buyer says, "Well, I didn't know I had the option to do additional inspections. I just thought it was just the general inspection." Well, guess what, folks? The buyer has the ability to do as many different inspections, not just your general, but they can do a sewer inspection, roof, electrical, foundation, plumbing, right? Air quality, right? The natural hazard disclosure, right? Maybe there's something outside of the scope of the property and that triggers them to do an additional inspection, right? So the essence is, how do you protect yourself, right? Well, documentation is the most important, because what you document, what you have the buyer sign and the seller sign, is your receipt, is your proof that, hey, if this ever comes back to haunt us, right, where there's a litigation or you didn't tell me, well, not necessarily. You signed the form that illustrates that you, one, acknowledged it, two, you signed it, and three, you have accepted by the signature. Okay. So let's go into the process, and then again, we'll go through the actual forms so you'll get a better understanding of what those forms look like. So today's session will go into the importance of your buyer due diligence, right? As real estate professionals, right, you're held to a higher standard, right? And part of the process is it's very exciting, right? When you have a buyer, you go through the motions of consultation, and they say, you know what, I'm okay working with you. And then you have them sign the buyer representation agreement, right? Now you go to work. Now you're looking and researching properties on the MLS, and you find a couple properties that the buyer's interested in seeing, right? Then you start the negotiations and all that once they identify the property that they want, right? That's cool. That's fun. Then your offer gets accepted, and that's where it starts the timeline, right? Your 30 days, your 35 days, or your 20 days, depending on what type of buyer you have in place. Well, that's where you need to start really understanding the timelines of contingency removals, or if the buyer is going to be releasing certain contingencies prior, right? Maybe that's a condition because they want to get their offer accepted, right? So these forms is just a reinsurance that the buyer has options. It doesn't matter if the buyer releases physical inspections, right? They can still do inspections. You know that. Even though they release that as a condition, they can still do any inspection. Okay. So I want you to understand that when someone says, I'm going to release my physical inspection, they still have the ability, ladies and gentlemen, to conduct a thorough inspection and hire anyone, a contractor, a handyman, anyone that specializes on that specific issue that the buyer is asking. You cannot not allow them to do their due diligence, right? Because then that can come back to haunt you, right? So even though I released that as a condition, doesn't mean that that's an exit for them to decide after they've done their inspections. hey, I want to cancel because of this foundation issue. Well, you release the physical contingency as part of the process. That's not a good reason. And because of that, the seller may have some rights because the buyer may be in a position of breach of contract, right? So, how do you maneuver those conversations and how do you protect yourself? Because then the agent, the buyer is going to look at you, well, I didn't know. Well, sure enough, if you consult with them and talk to them, they should know. And then obviously the legal obligations and the risk mitigation and the strategies around what we do. Okay, let me make sure there's no one else that I need to omit. Bingo. And please, everyone on Zoom, if you can, please mute yourself as we go through the presentation. Thank you. All right, so buyer investigation aligns with the residential purchase agreement timelines, right? Everything that we do is a timeline, right? If I submit an offer to Emilio as an example, right? He's the listing agent, and let's say that Salvador is the buyer's agent. The whole purpose is communications, right? You guys need to be in communications, especially because you've got a buyer that's relying and depending on your skill sets to get that offer accepted. So don't just send an email to the listing agent with the offer and all that. Build a rapport, build a relationship, call, and build that ultimate conversation piece because the listing agent will definitely appreciate it. I'm a true believer that a buyer's agent that calls and is a consistent, proactive agent, engagement to try to get their offer accepted, that's going to influence me to have a conversation with my seller saying, look, something about Salvador that I just feel that it's going to be a great process because we want to work with people that can get the deal done, right? And you'll know immediately if something is going to go sideways with the moment when you don't talk to someone or you talk to someone, it's like, I don't know if I really want to go through the process, right? But at the end, it's not about us, right? It's about the buyer and the seller and getting them to the finish line, right? Then we're going to also discuss the seller disclosures, right, versus the buyer's responsibility as part of the initial inspections, and then protecting your all parties through the process, right, and documentations, right? Because again, the seller has their responsibilities too, right? As part of the process is to divulge and disclose all material facts. And this is why we have a TDS. This is why we have the SPQ. This is why we have natural hazard disclosures. And then we have all of these advisories for one purpose and one purpose only is to disclose, to acknowledge advisories. Here, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, please be mindful to check and double check to make sure that you're completely satisfied with the overall condition of not just the property, interior, but also exterior and also the surrounding area. Does that make sense? Right? So part of that is paperwork, right? Our job is not just to find and put a buyer and a seller into escrow, but also the initial process. And when you do more and more and more deals, you're going to get better and better to understand one, the process and having that checklist of items that you need in order to be more of an efficient agent. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So let's go into the buyer investigation advisory. The purpose of the buyer investigation advisory is the duty to investigation, outlines the scope of inspections, permits, zonings, etc. And it also limits the broker's role not to a home inspector, but a legal advisory. It's just a disclaimer at the end of the day. And again, I'm going to share the three forms with you so you get a concise understanding of what the forms look like, right? And then also that a waiver is just an advisory to investigate thoroughly, right? Part of what we do, folks, is provide an understanding of the initial process. But at the end is here's the proof, right, of all of your rights regarding the initial process, right? Here is the advisory that says, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, the process is to navigate and do any and all inspections that are necessary to satisfy yourself. Okay. It doesn't just limit you to only general home inspection. You can do any inspection. If you want to crawl under the house, you can do that. Check the foundation, you can do that, right? Because at the end, what is the buyer going to do? They're going to release conditions, right? And those conditions ultimately tells the seller that they're still in the momentum of going forward and getting the deal closed. Or is this going to be a stop and hold? Let's negotiate because we found out other things that we're a little concerned. And I don't know if I want to take on those responsibility, but if the seller is willing to either help with repairs, help with credit, or help with a price reduction, I might be more in alignment to move forward than to cancel, right? Because the buyer has the option to also cancel. Okay. That's the beautiful thing. Have you ever heard from a buyer, especially a first-time home buyer, if we're going to put a deposit, are we going to lose our deposit? What's your question and answer to that? How do you converse that information if a consumer is saying, am I going to lose my deposit? Right? Well, it really depends. It depends on what part of the process we're in, and more so if we have release contingencies or we have not released contingencies. But even if you have not released contingencies, right? And you're backing out because of something totally different, that still can come back to haunt you. Because remember, all contracts have to be mutually agreed to cancel. Mutually, meaning it has to be acknowledged and agreed upon both. And if there's not a meeting of the mind between the buyer and the seller, then you don't have a mutual agreement, right? Then this is why we have stipulations of liquidated damages. This is why we have arbitrations and mediations. For that purpose is when we don't see eye to eye, then what is the next step? Well, the next step would be to do a mediation, right? Get someone that knows and understand how to mediate and diffuse a situation before it escalates to an arbitration or before it escalates to a potential lawsuit or claim, right? So the forms are here to protect all consumers and including all real estate agents. The forums were created to protect us more so because there's a lot of language. We're not experts in a lot of the things. Our job is just, again, putting the buyer and the seller and facilitating the process. But we are not roofers. We're not electricians, right? We're not plumbers. This is why we hire those professions to do their job and provide us with an analysis if there's issues or concerns that is going to be something that needs to be taken care immediately or in the near future. And that's also a negotiation a tool as well. If the buyer feels that they need to ask for that to be taken care of before we even close. That's the fantastic and the beautiful thing of what we do as real estate agents, right? Is negotiations. Okay. And how many of us love negotiations? Okay. I love negotiations. And remember, negotiations is take your emotions out of the part of the process, right? And stick to the facts and just keep pressing forward to make it a win-win because negotiations is, as I say it all the time, it's a win-win for everyone, right? Not just you or your client, and it doesn't matter who you represent if it's the seller or the buyer. Okay. So Rosie says buyer investigations also include buyers doing their own investigation regarding the city permits restrictions such as historical areas and vacational. Exactly. So thank you, Rosie, for always being my assistant. Absolutely. We are not responsible to go to the city and do the buyer's job. Okay. And I want to repeat, a lot of agents do. It's not our job. It's the buyer's job to go to the city and confirm and acknowledge, anything and everything about the property. Okay. And I know a lot of agents go out and beyond because they believe that it's a service that they think is part of the process. Well, the contract doesn't say that. Contract says that the buyer's responsible to do any of those inspections and going to the city, going to the county, and getting what they need in order to satisfy themselves to the overall property, right? So in essence, I know, and we do it all the time, but it's not recommended. Okay, because the problem with that is, what if there's something that we failed to bring or failed that we didn't ask, and then it comes back to haunt us, right? And now the buyer buys the property and something happens, right? Where the city comes in and red tags the property. Well, they're going to point fingers. Who do you think they're going to point fingers at? Right, Jim? Who are they going to point fingers at? Yeah, the agent. Okay. I don't want to be pointing fingers. This disrespectful, right? But in essence, it can definitely happen. So you got to be very, very careful in how you navigate that, right? All right, the next one is your buyer's inspection elections. Okay, this one is the core and the heartbeat, in my opinion, that I think all should be using on a regular basis, right? Documents the buyer's choice of inspection. This is the one that says, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, not just a home inspection, but you can also, right? You can also do any other inspections, and it gives you a checklist of different things that they can say, yes, I want to, or no, I don't need to. I don't need to do that one, right? Because when the situation that goes sideways, right, and now they're speaking to attorneys, what's going to happen is they're going to try to point fingers. And if we at least have this document that says, here, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, we had you acknowledge, review it, and understood what you were signing. And you told us that you only wanted just a general home inspection. You never told me you wanted a termite inspection. And now somehow they moved into the property and it's infested with termites. And now they're pointing fingers. Well, the general inspection didn't say that it had termites. Well, general inspection is just a general. They're not going to go into the details. Okay. They may note it, and it's our job to now review the form, right? Meaning the buyer, and ultimately get the experts on those. This is why you got to do not just your general inspection, but other things that are necessary to understand everything that's wrong with the property. Now, remember, folks, at the end of the day, all properties are sold in its as is condition. All properties are sold in its as is condition, meaning that the seller does not the seller does not have to do any repairs, any credit, or any price reduction. Again, I want to repeat, the seller is under no obligations to do any repairs, any credit, or any price reduction. As long as they disclose everything about the property, right? Here's the property. Here's everything we know about the property. Buyer, do your due diligence and throw whatever you want. The seller can say, nope, not going to do it. This property is being sold as is. Okay. Is that a bad thing? I'm surprised that a lot of you said no. I thought for sure, yeah, that's a bad thing. But you're right. It's not a bad thing. Because one, the buyer may be okay to buy the property because they already have in their mind they're going to fix it. Like when I see a house, me personally, it doesn't fear me one bit because I already know I already have some calculations of what that's going to cost, that's going to cost, that's going to cost. Okay. The beautiful thing is you can make ugly houses to beautiful houses. You can make modifications, you can add square footage. There's so many things you can do with the property, right? If you have the right vision to it. But see, the consumer doesn't know that, right? They're thinking cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. I'm already paying $1 million for my house. My payment is going to be $8,500 a month. So they see it in a different parameter. And I get it and I understand. But our job as professionals, right, is to be able to have them understand, look, if the seller doesn't want to do any concessions or credits or fix, it's okay. That's your opportunity, right? To do what? So you got to do it yourself. Yeah, exactly. Do it yourself. But also, yeah, but you can also back out of the deal, you know? You can say, okay, the seller is not going to budge. I get it. They're selling it as is. Good luck. They're going to have to disclose everything now. Then you move on to another property. Okay. So you're not stuck. But if you don't know the initial process, folks, then it makes it very hard because then you're in the chaos of that emotional parameter with the buyers, and that's not what you need to be. You need to be outside, focused on the end goal, right? Helping your buyers understand the process, but helping them make a sound decision, right? At the end of the day, do you want to move forward with this or not? And here's the thing, and I've seen it many, many times, right? On the MLS, the listing agent will put property is being sold in its as-is conditions. Please do not ask for any repair request because it will not be given. And then you submit an offer, and then the counter offer reinforces that too, right? And it says, buyer, we're not giving any type of credit. Do not bother to ask, right? And then we do our investigations, and the buyer's agent says, well, they told me on the MLS, they told me on the counter offers, right? Does that mean you still cannot ask because they've said that? No, no. You know what? You have the upper advantage here. Why? You're in escrow. Okay. It's a 50-50 gamble. It's like playing poker. It's like going to Vegas and playing blackjack, right? It is a gamble, right? Yeah, I heard you say in the beginning on the MLS, but hey, we didn't anticipate significant issues. It's how you articulate the conversation, folks. What did I said early when I was saying about Emilio and Salvador, right? Communications, right? Build that rapport. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to butter up Emilio. I'm going to butter up Salvador. Why? Because I want him to help me talk to his clients. See, I'm thinking not just for my clients, but I'm also thinking he can be a big influence to his clients, right? And if I have that great rapport with him, guess what he's going to do? Because he also has his end goal too, right? To close the deal. That's his job, right? His job is not to be that King Kong. Oh, no, no, we're firm and we're stern. He wants to close the deal as much as we do because he doesn't get paid until we close the deal. Does that make sense? But if you don't know how to initiate the process, and this is where most deals fall apart, folks, right? It's during this time. Within the first 2 weeks of being in escrow, that's where all of this kind of goes sideways. But how do we continue to, from a potential derailment, how do we get it back in alignment and continue the process? Well, it's communications. And I'm not going to use whatever the listing agent said, oh, the property's being sold in this as this. I get it. But once we do all inspections, I might still throw out what we believe is fair, right? Yeah, well, and here's the mindset of buyer's agents. They'll say, well, we're going to piss off the listing agent. She already told me that property's being sold in his as is condition, right? And they're going to get pissed off. So be it. Get your emotions out of the way. We have a job to do is to take care of our buyers and our sellers' best interests, right? And if the buyers are asking me, I got to buy what my buyers are asking me, what my sellers are asking me. And I'm going to flip it around too. If you're that listing agent, right? Let's just say you're that listing agent. Don't take it personal. Do not take it personal because there's a lot of egos in real estate, lots of egos, right? I think realtors are kind of like contractors. They have a lot of egos, right? Take that nonsense out of the way, stick to the facts, do what's best for your clients, and finish to close this deal. Make sense? Okay. I know I was saying a lot of stuff. Okay, the form also includes checklists and then should be filled by not pre-checked by agents, mandatory signatures to confirm an understanding. All right, so the buyer inspection waiver. The whole purpose is to formulate a waiver specifying inspections used when a buyer refuses to recommend any inspections. Again, going back to your investors, how do you make your offer solid? How do you stand out from the other offers that come in? Let's say you're in a multiple counter, right? And your client is an investor going in all cash, right? And you have two or three other offers, but they're conventional with, I would say, 10% or 20% down payment, but your cash. But your cash is less than the conventional, right? How do you showcase the position to ultimately get your offer accepted, right? Well, it goes back to contingencies, right? If you release, the appraisal may help, right? Because you're saying to the seller, hey, I'm going cash. I could care less what the value is. We're not going to use that as a parameter, even though, folks, even though a cash offer, they could still do an inspection. Well, you're saying, Simon, they're not getting a loan. Why would they need an appraisal? Because they want to know what the value of the home. They don't want to pay for something that's overpriced. But guess what? Certain areas and part of LA, people go above and beyond because they have the means and the money and they can care less what the property value is because they like the desirable area, the school, the location, or the property itself. And they're willing to pay more than above value. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Questions, thoughts, or concerns? And I'm sorry, I'm kind of losing my voice a little bit. I don't know if it's the weather happening here. Let's see. Do we have? Oh, we have a couple people trying to jump on. Let's see. All right. So part of the inspection waiver, it allows one full disclosure, right? Full disclosure to the agent saying, "Hey, look, we provided you that you should do an inspection. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to tie your hands and say you don't have to do them if you choose not to. That's the buyer's decision. And that can be the breaking point that allows your offer to be accepted or not. Because when the listing agent and the listing agent and the seller see the offer that comes in, they dissect it. They look at price, terms, and conditions, right? They look at those three parameters. And those three parameters will ultimately be what direction the seller's going to go. Are they going to counter you? Are they going to reject you? Or are they going to accept you? Right? We would love to get our offer accepted and forget about the other counters, right? We're not even going to bother to counter. We're just going to get accepted your offer. Guess what? The seller can do that. Remember, folks, it's not always about the highest offer. And I've seen it firsthand. It's not always about the highest offer. Sometimes it's about terms. Sometimes it's about conditions. So if you see your offer as a resume, right? Look at it from that parameter, right? Your resume. How's your resume look? Have you updated your resume, right? To keep the most updated information on it, right? Because the goal is to get that resume looked at and ultimately accepted, right? Because the whole goal of a resume is to get that job, right? Well, we're unemployed until we get employed. And how we get employed is getting our offer, our resume accepted. Then we go to work, right? Because then we see the end goal of getting paid. But if you have a crappy offer, then good luck. Good luck. Because they're going to either reject it or they're going to counter you with terms that are not favorable to your buyer. So remember, always go with the right mindset when navigating these agreements. That part of the process is understanding, waiving certain things, doing certain inspections, and ultimately the advisory of why it's important for the buyer to do their due diligence. That's the whole process and the whole conversation of today's topic is to for you to understand those areas. Okay, let's see here. So the BIA is the advisory buyer to inspect. The BIE records which inspection buyers will do. The BIW, buyer declines recommended inspections, meaning waiving inspections, okay? All require buyer signature for purpose of compliance. Let's see, do we have a question on Zoom? 1 second. Some cash investors bring their own inspectors at the time of showing and then may waive inspections. It is important to have them to advise them to do inspections, and they decide not to have them to sign the waiver. Absolutely, Rosie, spot on, and thank you for always putting some understanding too, because when you do deals and deals, and if you especially work with investors or developers, they have a different mindset in how they see things. They don't worry about the little things. Oh my gosh, there's termites, there's cockroaches, right? Where a first-time home buyer may see that as a significant issue, right? And that could be the alter uh, where the buyer decides to cancel the deal. Okay. So you gotta understand your clients also, because if they're wanting a property that is in move-in condition, meaning they don't have to do anything, why are you showing houses that are in not so good condition, right? Do your research, do your homework, and make sure that not just sending your clients listings, but also maybe looking at the photos and seeing if it's the criteria. This is why the beautiful thing of what we call the MLS allows you to really fine tune on what the buyer's desires are. If the buyer doesn't want a swimming pool, why are you sending homes with the pool? If the buyer says, I don't want a two-story house, I want a single because I don't want to be climbing up and down stairs, why are you showing a two-story home, right? Listen to your client's needs and wants. Does that make sense? Okay. So best practice always is, document everything in writing. Never skip this form in it as is or investor deals, right? Because agents will be agents and they're going to say properties being sold and as is. Well, guess what? On the purchase agreement, it already has that. It really um, agitates me, okay? And I'm only saying this because it's internal, right? But it agitates me when a listing agent rewrites what's already on the contract. Just letting you know the property is being sold in its as-is condition. Why do they need to do that? It doesn't, well, because one, they haven't read the entire contract. The contract already says to the consumer, the buyer, and the seller that all properties are sold in its as-is condition. That's it. Simple. But agents still do it. I don't know why. Okay. That's one of my sticklers. Don't do that. None of my KW agents do that. Also the BIW only for extreme cautions. Again, we don't ever recommend the buyer to waive inspections, right? It's a risk and it's a gamble. Okay, especially if you haven't had a chance to look at the property. I would say that if you're going to go in that direction, know your clientele and know the ratifications that can alter this, because once they release inspection contingencies or any contingency, that may be a tipping point where they may uh, potentially jeopardize their earnest deposit. Okay. And we're not here to lose buyers' deposit, right? And they may be aggressive in the beginning, but when you're going to lose 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 of earnest deposit, it's a hard pill to swallow. I don't want to lose that money, you know? But also educate your clients on the importance of the risk involved when it comes to releasing inspections, right? Because inspections are the number one kill deals. And if the buyer is willing to release that, tell them you got to be mentally prepared. If you don't end up buying this property, you cannot use that as a condition to back out. The seller might have recourses because you have breached the contract and they may be in a position for monetary damages. So I caution you. And this is why you want to protect yourself by having them sign a form. If they're going to waive something, fine, waive it, but I'm going to cover my bases because I don't want you to come back to me saying, you did not tell me. Yes, I did. Here's the form. You sign it. Here's the date that you signed it. And here's what you ended up waiving. Let them make that decision. I'm okay with that because now when you bring it up to your broker, the broker is going to be in a better position and say, well, no, no, no. I have a document here that, Salvador or Jim, or Emilio or any of you had them signed, acknowledging, understanding, and the proof is by the signature. There's no hiding around that, folks. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Let's go to the next. Let's see. All right. So let me go ahead and now it's kind of an open discussion now, but let me go into the actual form itself. So bear with me here momentarily while I do this. Great to see all of you on Zoom. So thank you very much for being on Zoom. And oops, wait a minute. My bad. 1 second. 1 second while I try to get my car forms in place. Okay, so I investigate. You guys see it, right? Okay, but I know people on Zoom don't see it yet. And oops. One. So, okay. People on Zoom, do you see my form? No, they don't see it.
No.
Okay, 1 second. I don't know what happened. Yeah, well, let's see here. I don't know what transpired. Let me bear with me, guys. Apologize. Let me just remove the end the show here. Hopefully that'll work. Now, okay, here we go. I think we're ready now. Okay. All right. On Zoom, do you see the buyer investigation advisory?
No.
Okay. I know the people in the room see it, but hold on 1 second here. Let's try this and see if this works now. Do you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, folks. So here is the buyer investigation advisory, which is car form BIA, right? Now, part of the offer when you submit the purchase agreement, this advisory is already attached to it. So it's not something that you don't have to remember to add it. It'll automatically, as part of like the possible representation of buyer and seller, right? Your agency disclosure. So the beautiful thing is this one, at least it covers you. But what it does is it provides you with a disclaimer. And that disclaimer basically the importance of property investigation, the condition, the improvements, the reason that is important for the buyer to do their due diligence to discover any potential issues, right? Red flags, right? Maybe there's something there that the buyer would not necessarily purchase because the seller or disclosures that were provided in a way that says, okay, now I know why I need to cancel is because of the condition, right? But it also goes into, the broker's obligations, right? And the broker's obligation is we're experts in helping you navigate, but we're not experts in a lot of other stuff, such as being on top of the roof and inspection the roof, right? Plumbing and all that. If you're not a general contractor, why would you be giving advice to your client, right? Well, I have expertise because I've done it to my house. Well, you're putting yourself in liability. Never, 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 never do that. Let the experts, let the licensed people do that. Your job is just to put a deal together and close it, and that's it. The problem where I see a lot of agents, they get so entrenched into wanting to know everything because they feel that they have to. Folks, you don't. And this is why it's important how you navigate the conversations. And it's okay. You don't need to know the expert of all stuff. Okay. That's not what you have a license for. Number three goes into your your position that we strongly advise, right, to do inspections and check the condition and the suitability of all aspects of the property. And everything that we do is we're acting against the advice of the broker. So if you do anything other than what we're telling you to do based on the contracts, then you're going against the broker's advice, meaning the company, the broker, and you as a real estate agent. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's another disclaimer. Hey, I didn't tell you to go up on the roof and you slip and fall and now you're paralyzed, right? Well, and that could happen. That's not what we recommend. Let the experts and the professionals do that. Three A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, and K go into, and I believe a couple more. L is, we strongly advise that they do a general condition of the property, its systems and components, right? And I'm not going to go too much into it, but it talks about foundation, it talks about roof, it talks about leaks, it talks about heaters, ACs, electrical, pools, and you name it. It also goes into square footage too, right? It goes square footage that, sometimes properties may show as a 1,500 square feet, but in essence, it may be 1,400 square feet. It may be 2,100 square feet. We're not experts on it, but it's important for them to, if that's one of their biggest concern, is to get the appropriate experts to go out there and do that, right? Fences, encroachments, and all that fun stuff. Termites, right? Presence of conditions like lead to termites is another. Soil stability, water, environmental, earthquake and floorings, fire and other insurance, right? Right now, with everything that's happening, it's getting harder and harder to get insurance, right? Especially your condos and your um, condos and townhomes that have HOAs, right? Some of them are having issues with getting loans because they don't have enough reserves, and now insurances are being an issue with condominiums. So what's happening with condos? Condos are also going and decreasing in value because they cannot sell good title, and that may be a concern of a consumer, a seller that's trying to sell property, and they're having challenges because buyers cannot qualify for it. So understand the parameters. Building permits, zonings, and government requirements. Again, the importance of checking with the local city, the county, and making sure that they do their due diligence. Rental property security and safeties as well, and then neighborhood areas, right? Checking around the neighborhood, right? What's so funny is, you know, uh, some people may love the property, and we as real estate professionals, I would encourage my clients and say, hey, before you make a sound judgment that this is a property you want to buy, drive around the neighborhood. Maybe go a couple evenings and kind of check the neighborhood, right? And see if this is somewhere where you feel comfortable, right? Because it may be a pretty house, but you may be in an area that has industrial or traffic, right? Or schools or plazas, right? And there's a lot of noise, right? Properties that go right on the flight path, right? LAX. There's homes like in Inglewood, South Central, where you can literally see the plane right above you. I mean, you can probably touch it, right? And you can smell the jet fuel. Yeah. Someone may love the house because they're not taking a photo of the plane, they're taking a photo of the home, right? And it may be a coincidence that planes unfortunately don't fly when they do their inspections, but that's why it's important for them to kind of check around the neighborhood because that may be a deal killer. That I didn't want my house to be right under the flight path. of LAX. And with LAX, it's an international airport, so you have planes 24/7. Just say. Okay. Any questions regarding the advisory? All right, let me go now into the buyer's investigation election. Okay. Which is, again, this is one that is not automatically included. This is something that you have to add to it, right? Pretty self-explanatory, the property address, the importance of it, property investigations, buyer rights and duties, right? You have an affirmative duty to exercise reasonable care to protect yourself, including discovery of the legal, practical, and technical implications of disclosed facts to investigate and verify information, in fact, that you know or that are within your diligent attention and observation. This agreement gives you the right to investigate the property, and if you exercise these rights, and you must do so in accordance with the terms of the agreement. Now, when they say the terms of the agreement, they're referring and referencing the RPA, the purchase agreement. Okay. The agreement gives you the right to do investigations to the property and exercise those rights, right? This is the best way for you to protect yourself. It is extremely important for you to read all written reports provided by a professional, keyword professional, and to discuss the results of inspections with the professional who conducted the inspections. Now, did we conduct those inspections? No, we provided them, but we didn't conduct them, meaning we're not experts on them. You may know a little bit about it, but we're not experts. And don't put yourself in the line of fire, folks, is what we're saying. This is a great opportunity for us to talk to the inspector. If they're providing you, you're paying for that inspection, then it's their job to explain it to you. So if that's the case, Mr. and Mrs. Spy, that's a very good question. Why don't we do this? Why don't we reach out to the inspection company that did this inspection, and that way we can have a three-way conversation, and you can ask those direct questions to the inspector that conducted the inspection last Saturday. Fine. And then you set it up. You could set it up. Hey, by the way, my clients have some questions regarding the inspection, and we want to go deep dive into a little bit more because they're a little hesitant. And this is that tipping point where they may decide to cancel, but maybe you could put some reinsurance, right? And that's an opportunity for the inspector to say, look, I'm not an expert at that particular. I absorbed it, I notified, and I put it in this report. Then that's when you need to get an electrician or a HVAC, right, to do further inspection. That actually is going to break it apart, see what the issue is, right? Because that may be, again, that tipping point where the buyer may decide, okay, I think I can manage that, or no, let's ask for that as part of our request of repairs. Now, the beautiful thing is the buyer investigation and buyer represents and agrees that the buyer has independently considered the available inspections. Okay. And here is the inspections that the buyer can do. Okay. They can do a general inspection. They can do a termite inspection, chimney, electrical, HVAC, lead base, plumbing, square footage, structure, easement, encroachments, foundation, lot size, boundaries, pool and spa, roof, sewer, septic, soil survey, tree, well, water systems and component, random gases. How do you say this word? Yeah, that word. Asbestos, methane gas, mold, so on and so forth, right? Now, the reason you want to provide this form as layer of protection, moving forward is because now the buyer cannot come back and say, well, Simon, I didn't know that it was just a general inspection that I can do. Because in a lot of consumers, they think it's just one general inspection and that's it. And for the most part, that's usually enough for the buyer to make a decision to move forward or not. But in essence, a general inspection is not going to go deep into the other departments, right? The other types of inspections you can do. And it may not be that the buyer wants to do all of them, right? Maybe they're just concerned after seeing the general inspection that says, well, after looking at the chimney, maybe we should get a quote to clean it, all right? Or maybe there's some cracks on the chimney that we should do thorough inspections on it, right? And with that, you hire an inspection company to come out and actually do the inspection report, which is above the scope of a general inspection. But that may be the key, right? That will tell the buyer, look, I'm glad I get the chimney inspection. We know what the amount to clean it, maintain it, or repair, replace it, right? And now we can either move forward with it or we can decide to cancel. Make sense? Okay. And again, buyer acknowledges, signs it. And then that helps with if this ever comes back to bite us in the rear, right? Buyer investigation. Buyer represents and agrees that the buyer has independently considered the available inspections and investigations at this time and has decided to order only those inspections and investigations checked below. Okay, so they have the option to do so. All right, and then the last form. Yes, Jim.
Regarding the general inspection, section, you can ask which of these items were during the time they had,
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
which items were improved of the heavy inspections that you're concerned. And if they tell you, the roof was done 10 years ago, you can make your list.
Right.
And that'll justify credit or reduction in price.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. So, but the beautiful thing about this, and I remember many, many, many years ago, we had a incident. Thank goodness it didn't go into a litigation, but the buyer was pissed because the buyer wasn't aware that the buyer can do additional inspections. They just thought a general inspection was the only thing that they can do. We're not there to put walls and roadblocks, the buyer during their time period, right? And it defaults at what? 17 days, right? 17 days for a buyer to do their inspections. That means if they want to hire 5 general inspections, guess what? 5 inspections can go do it. There's nothing that the seller can say or do to stop the buyer from doing that if it's within their timelines, right? After that timeline, yeah, they can deny that request, but prior to that, they can do as many inspections. Now, it's repetitive, right? You're doing another inspection with another inspection company? Yeah, hey, peace of mind. If I was the listing agent, I would feel more comfortable, right? That they're doing whatever they need to do to satisfy themselves, right? Because that will diffuse any potential claims in the future that, hey, we gave the buyer the time necessary for them to do any and all inspections, and they did. They not just got one, they not just got two, they got 3, 4, and 5 inspections done, right? And that's perfectly fine within their timeline. And then after that time frame, as the buyer releases that as part of the condition, then the listing agent and the seller can refuse any additional, right? And again, it's not part of the agreement because the buyer has already released it. And in good faith, the buyer may say, look, I need to do this one more, but it's just for me. It's not nothing that will jeopardize deal. Well, you can allow it. It's not that you can't, you could, but it's not a determining factor that they get another inspection. Now, with that being said, I also want to caution you. If it's a new material fact that was brought to the buyer's attention that was not in the previous advisories disclosures, then yeah, they can do additional inspections. And guess what? They may be able to back out of the deal. Let's say you or your TC forgot to provide the SBQ or the TDS. It was just something you forgot, right? And now you give the buyer's agent, hey, by the way, we apologize, we forgot to submit the TDS. Here's the TDS, and this is already when the buyer has released seller disclosures, right? And now they look at the TDS and they say, holy moly, there's something here that we were not aware. We want to do an investigation on that. Even though they released that as a condition, you cannot deny them the opportunity to do their research, investigations, and all that, because the moment you do, they may have a case against you if this goes sideways. So allow that, okay? This is why timelines, having a great transaction coordinator to put you in the right checklist of things to release and not release is important. Now, remember, let's just say you still need more time because I know these investors, they do 5 days inspections, right? And then they don't perform. Your job is to ask for that extension. Don't just avoid it and think I'm going to go under the radar as much as I possibly can. That's not good practice. Your practice is to be diligent and proactive in this engagement. Then your role is to ask for that extension. Meaning, I'm going to ask Salvador, saying, Salvador, listen, I know we put 5 days to release physical inspection. My clients had an emergency. They needed to leave out of town. They just got back. I know we have one more day to release that, but I'm going to need an additional 5 more days or a week to release this as a condition. Okay. Now, does the listing agent and seller need to whatchamacallit, allow you that extension? The answer is no, they don't have to. Because the original agreement, what both parties agree was what was set in stone. But if I want to continue with this, because the buyer has that option to cancel too, because they're within their rights to. And if the buyer, excuse me, if the seller is not giving me that extension, then I have to tell the buyer, listen, I did my very best. The buyer, excuse me, the seller declined a request for an extension. What would you like me to do? One option is we can cancel, find another property with more flexibility. Maybe we can put different terms. But we're kind of in a miss. Or take the risk, right? The risk that you release that as a condition, but knowing that by releasing that, you cannot come back and use that as ammunition because you acknowledge, you read, and you sign that form, right? So you gotta understand those elements. All right, lastly, let me go over the waiver. All right, so this is your buyer inspection waiver, right? This is again for both parties, the buyer or the the buyer's agent or the listing agent, right? If anyone is going to waive their inspection, reinforce it, okay, and document it, right? And here's why it's important. The importance of the property investigation, again, it's the same information on your first form, your buyer advisory, and it's also part of the importance of your election form, right? Of all the inspections you can do. And it goes into the same component of, buyer's rights and duties, but it also goes into 3 categories, right? Or actually 4 categories. And number 3 goes into A, B, and C. And it says the following: home inspection waiver. Broker recommends that the buyer obtain a home inspection, even if the seller or broker has provided buyer with copies of a home inspection report obtained by the seller or a previous buyer. If you do not do so, you're acting against the advice of the broker. And not just signing this form, but it's also asking the buyer to initial this. You got to initial it. So it it just reinforces your position. Buyer has decided to not obtain a general inspection at this time, unless buyer makes a election in writing during buyer's investigation period, if any. Buyer waives the right to obtain a general home inspection. B goes into the termite, right? It goes again and it has them emphasize we're removing the home inspection, but we're also removing termite, right? And to be quite honest with you, I think both of these should be merged together. I think both should be the same thing, but it has separate. And then it also has you where it initials. And then section C goes into broker recommends that the buyer obtain inspections for the following items, right? Again, it just reinforces, right? That, hey, the home was built in the 1930s. It may be the original sewer, right? We may recommend that if they're going to release general inspections, they're basically saying they're not going to do any inspections. We may recommend, just to cover our tail, is documented. Hey, we also instructed the buyer to do a sewer inspection, right? Or any and all inspections, or go back to the BIE, the buyer advisory of the elections, and say, look, put that as part of the agreement. You know, we provided to the buyer the form BIE, and the buyer refused to do any and all inspections. There you go, folks. That's your bubble. That's your safe haven. That's your protection. That's what ultimately, if this comes back and says, well, the agent didn't tell me, and now I lost my deposit, because losing money again, folks, it's not an easy pill to swallow. Yeah, I know that no one wants to lose money, but you know, it sometimes happens, right? So this is the reason you want to protect yourself. All right, number 4 goes into waivers of additional investigations recommended by the reports, right? Again, let's just say that the listing agent provided from a past canceled inspection, right? Here are all the reports, and then we were provided with all these reports, and the buyer says, look, I'm okay, I don't need to do any, I saw what I need to see. Well, then, you know, you can say, here are the additional inspections that were provided to you on the general, wood, or other, right? Maybe if it's a sewer, plumbing, or electrical, or permits, whatever the case may be, documented, and then have the buyer sign. Okay. And again, it goes with the same thing. The buyer represents and agrees that the buyer has independently considered all of the above, right? And then you get the buyer to sign. Questions, thoughts, concern regarding the 3 forms? Let's see if we have anyone. All right, so Rosie, some cash investors bring their own inspections at the time of showing. They may waive inspection. It is important to have them advise them to do inspections. Yep, absolutely. We still advise the buyers to conduct all the inspections they deem necessary, even if they are given seller pre-inspections or inspections conducted by previous buyers who have canceled their contracts in escrow. Yeah, and it goes both ways too, folks, okay? It goes both ways, meaning if you're the listing agent, right? Um, and a buyer went into escrow, fell out of escrow, your responsibility that these disclosures are still provided to you, right? These disclosures are given to you and your seller. Those now have to be part of the process for the future buyer. Okay, because it's material fact. Well, these reports are ridiculous. You know, the buyer wanted $100,000 in price reduction or repairs and credits. You know, it's going to kill the deal for the next buyer. And that's a lot of the mindset that a lot of agents feel that they don't want to provide it, right? Well, I caution you with that. Remember, because at the end of the day, it's the buyer's sound judgment, right? Meaning that they have to make a sound judgment that they're going to take everything and make a decision if they're going to move forward or not move forward. And especially if you are on the listing side here and you have all these disclosures, you know what I recommend you do? I would recommend that you upload this on the MLS as a, what is that section? Thank you, supplement. Supplement. So the buyer who is looking at your property has all of these reports, and that way you're not wasting time. That the buyer knows, okay, I saw the supplement reports and I'm okay to move forward. I'm going to submit an offer, because you don't want to go back again and the second buyer cancels, the third buyer cancels, and all that fun stuff. Does that make sense? Any questions, thoughts, or concerns today? Yes, sir. What is the time for revise of this? Yeah, so yeah, so the changes, thank you. Yes, you're right. This is the current one as we speak. Next week on Tuesday, the 24th, the revised one will be updated to your car forms. Okay, so for now, if you have any deals from now till Tuesday, you're going to use this form. Tuesday of next week, it should update all of the new forms, and it should say June 2025. Okay, good eye on that. All right. Any other questions? Yes, Amelia.
Waiver contingencies? There's the form that says CRB, is that the same as the BIW?
Let's check. 1 second, so. Let's find out and see. RPA, click. Okay. So this is the RPA. What section, Emilio? L, what number? 3? L1.
Yeah, so where it says rule or waiver contingencies. Right, you click on that box.
Right here?
Right below that. CRB.
Oh. All right, so the CRB is your contingency removal of the buyer. So if you click that, it's automatically going to populate the contingency removal. Okay, so when you do so and you go all the way to the bottom of it, it should provide you with the and it doesn't do, I don't think it does it on the desktop version. But let's just go with, oh, here it is. So this is what it's populating, the buyer contingency removal. Okay, so part of the process, a savvy listing agent, folks, will do this. Most buyers will not submit this as part of their offer, but most buyers agents will, if they're knowledgeable, sophisticated, and understand that this is, again, the deal that will ultimately get your offer accepted. If you're releasing a certain contingency automatically when you're in negotiations, you should be providing the buyer contingency removal, which is the CRB. That stands for the buyer contingency removal. Now, this form is populated, and then now the buyer has options to release certain things, right? Loan, appraisal, entire buyer investigation contingencies, and then it has all of these other stuff that you can do, right? So this is, again, the security from a seller point of view and the listing agent, that the buyer's proactive, that they're not using that as part of their protection when it comes to buying the property. Remember, because at the end of the 17 days, as a default amount, buyer shall release any and all contingency, which is section 4, right? Once you see this, right, that's where you want to do a little bit of the happy dance, right? Because the buyer has gone through the motions of releasing all conditions, or meaning they have already exposed their deposit, where if the buyer decides to cancel, and they could, they may be in jeopardy of losing their earnest deposit when the buyer hereby removes any and all. That means everything above here. Does that make sense? So that's the form, Emilio, that is provided.
So that's a little bit separate from. You still
Yeah.
have that other.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Let me see. I don't think there's anyone else. All right. Well, that concludes today's class. Any questions on Zoom? And if no questions, thank you very much. Have a great Friday afternoon, great weekend, and I will see you on the next contract class. Thanks, everyone.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
weekend, Simon.
Thank you very much. You too. Thanks, everyone. Good class today.